All right, welcome to a special NFL draft edition of the Pro Football Doc podcast. And for this edition, I'm going to bring on a special guest, Ethan Turner, who is an injury analyst. Yes, a quote competitor injury analyst, but I don't view that way at all. I think we work well, even though I've never actually met Ethan in person. I've seen his work. Thrilled to have him on. He works with Fantasy Headliners, and he does a rookie draft injury guide. Ethan, welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's nice to actually talk face to face a little bit. We've talked on the phone a couple times, but this is the first time we've actually sat down and had a conversation. So I'm excited.
Yeah, I mean, no question. We talked on the phone. I'm well aware of all of the good things that you do. And I don't know. First off, I would say I think what you do, so I think some people have the impression that somehow injury analyst guys are competitive. I don't view that at all. Um, first of all, there are a lot of opinions out there in the world, right? And I think
Yeah,
it's just because you or someone else might have a different opinion than I do doesn't make me right or wrong automatically, or you right or wrong, or a bad guy. I mean, look, in the draft, I mean, the NFL GMs will, one guy will say this is the best player in the draft, the other guy will say no, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's what makes the world go around. And to some extent, I think people think that injury analysis is cut and dried. No, there's a good amount of opinion in there. It's
yeah,
not always black or white, etc. And so I think it's fine and quite honestly healthy to have other different opinions. So welcome to the show. I respect your work, and my guys love your stuff. Your rookie guide. I think they're just lazy because then you do all the work and they go, we don't have to research that.
yeah.
So
Well,
you, thank you for that.
that definitely was one of the goals for me is to. So can I? I'm going to talk a little bit about just what the guide is in case.
Yeah,
Somebody
sure.
listening doesn't really know what I do. So, about 5 years ago, I started getting into just NFL injury analysis, and I realized that there were a couple websites that were doing injury histories for NFL players once they got into the league and kind of cataloging it and really having that data to then use and make decisions for fantasy football, because I was a big fantasy football guy who was in PT school. And so, but what I found was that there was no place for me to go to find injury history data prior to the NFL. We had great ways of tracking them once they get into the NFL, but there was no history data from these guys when they were in college or even high school to know if maybe there was something that they had had in their past that could impact them in the future. So, what we were finding was, or what I was finding, is that I was getting really frustrated because I would find out after the fact that a guy had had an injury in the past and now he has the same injury, and everyone's like, "Oh, I couldn't believe that this happened," and I was just getting so frustrated because I didn't feel like I had all the data that I wanted to have to make decisions. So. 5 years ago, I decided that I was going to start collecting injury history data for guys before they got to the NFL, so that we would have that data set that we could then add their NFL stuff to. And since then, it's basically just evolved into now I do about 100 plus players every year, rookies that are coming into the NFL. I go back, I just scour the internet. It's all public data. So it's not like obviously I don't have any access to their medical records or anything, but if it's public data and it's been reported somewhere, I usually have it in the guide. And so now I have that data set to then use to make decisions down the road. So it's it's basically me just realizing that there was a gap in the data and trying to fill that gap so that very, very talented people like you can then use that data to make analysis and help fantasy players. That was my main goal when I did this.
How do you pick the 100 players? I mean, there's going to be 200, almost 250 drafted. How do you pick the 100?
Yeah. So the whole process starts right around the NFL season ending, right when we get into the kind of draft season. I watch a lot of college football, so I kind of have a rough idea of which players are the most likely to be drafted, and so I start with the guys that are pretty well locked in to being first round or second round picks, and then I kind of progress out as the preseason, and we start getting insiders that have a little bit more knowledge of which players are the most likely to get drafted. I start adding them. And then I do skew everything a little bit towards just fantasy football, just because that's what I enjoy, analyzing, and that's kind of what I do during the season. So I prioritize a little bit more the offensive players, but I do try to get the big defensive players as well.
Gotcha. So essentially, you're targeting fantasy interest and Thursday, Friday picks, right? I mean,
Yes.
less worried about Saturday picks, et cetera.
Yes.
So you're from Pittsburgh or just a Steelers
No,
fan?
no, no. I'm a Steelers fan, but I'm actually from Illinois. I live right in the middle of Illinois, very very tiny town. So it's about 5,000 people, and actually the town I live in is about 500.
So why all the Pittsburgh stuff?
Honestly, the Steelers are big here. I think it's just because they were so dominant in the 70s, and so a lot of my older male role models are Steelers fans, and so I just kind of picked up the Steelers as kind of my go-to team. While I was young and playing football, I didn't really, we live about 3 hours away from what used to be where the Rams played in St. Louis, from Chicago and from Indy. So there's no real like strong local presence for any teams. So, we see a lot of Cowboys fans and a lot of Steelers fans because that's just what people, grew up with, and, the 70s and 80s. And, that just kind of transcends down the generations around here.
I'm surprised that the '86 Bears didn't win some people and over, and the Greatest Show on Turf didn't win some people over, et cetera.
Yeah, they're definitely Bears fans around. When I was younger, I guess, and when I started playing football myself, the Steelers were, winning Super Bowls. So those are some of my first memories of really like watching, football regularly to see a team, and it was, the Steelers winning the Super Bowl. So they were really good when I was young. I guess I don't know. I just kind of took them over, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's cool. So appreciate what you do, and like I said, the boys use it and saves their time. And the college is more difficult because they don't always say much. I mean, heck, they're in
No.
some ways they're worse than hockey. At least hockey says upper body, lower body. I mean,
Yeah.
and the NFL I don't think is great. I mean, knee questionable. What does that mean, right? And that's where the
Yeah.
video comes in. Uh, so your research, I think, is helpful to like get a background of where they're at, and who knows? As you know, Sports Injury Central, we've expanded to basketball and baseball, and college football is probably next. And at the beginning, I wasn't really comfortable, on Twitter talking about college kids because they were amateurs. And did you
Yeah.
want mom or dad or brother or sister? And look, the amateurs were more likely to see what I said. I mean, the
Yeah.
professionals, I mean, I don't know. I know some that follow me, but it's like, hey, you got to grow a thicker skin. I'm saying something that an opinion, you're getting paid millions of dollars. But the college kids, I sort of stayed away from, at least real time analysis and this, that, the other. On a occasion, I'd weigh in a little bit, and then sometimes people would get sensitive. But now with the NIL, and they're basically professionals, I
Yeah.
think it's going to feel a lot more comfortable for us at Sports Injury Central to do that. Now it's just a matter of bandwidth. I suppose we could fire up the command center on Saturdays too, but I might get a divorce and, but we
Yeah.
have added some
That's a little
other.
tough.
Yeah, I have added. We have added some extra doctors, some additional other team physicians that have worked college football, although we haven't pushed that. So we'll see. But what I do, I guess, compared to your injury guide. And I think this is where it's complementary. Is I can't help but staring at the Shazier jersey in the background, and to this day, I don't know what it was like for you, but I've never had a more when he went down. Even though we've all seen hundreds of people carted off in the NFL and so forth. Um, when he went down, the instant he went down, I had a visceral feeling unlike any other that I've had for someone I didn't personally know. Right? I mean, if you know someone, you have a better,
Yeah.
a more emotion. I didn't personally know Ryan Shazier, but the second he went down, I was like, this is not good. And thankfully, 99.9% of the time when someone goes down or even is collared and spine boarded off, I go, I think he's going to be okay. It's better safe than sorry. Ryan Shazier and Periscope was
Yeah.
alive and kicking at that time. When I did that Periscope, I mean, I think my voice cracked. I felt very uncomfortable and I felt bad for that kid and family. I
Yeah.
was very worried. Look, this outcome, where he's at, I mean, that's awesome, right? I mean, the fact that obviously he's never
Yeah. I
returning to the
mean,
NFL. Yeah, and so I rely on, and we rely on very qualitative video analysis where a lot of your stuff is fact based, which is cool, which is a good
yeah.
balance. And I will give you this kudo, Ethan. I certainly follow you, and Ethan's a great follow, and he does a great job. And I'm not a fantasy expert, right? You are, and DFS and drafts and whatever. And in my Twitter timeline, people say, "Should I take this guy or this guy?" I'm like, or should I play this guy or not? Well, who else do you have? I don't know. And I've always
Yeah.
say I'm an injury expert, not a fantasy expert. I think you're both, and so kudos for that. But
Yeah.
the one thing I do notice about you and your stuff is, I guess, um, um, you know, uh, being copied is a form of flattery. You're one of the guys who you do your own thing, and I appreciate that. Some of the others do a
Yeah.
lot of mimicking and different things, which is okay. I mean, look, there's room for lots of people out there. And anyway, so kudos for your striking out and doing your what you love to do. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well, it's definitely it's like anything. Fantasy and injury analysis has exploded, and you probably have seen it more than anybody. When I started 5 years ago, there were maybe 10, pretty prominent people doing injury analysis. Now it seems like every single fantasy website has an injury guy. Every sports, station has an injury guy. Every TV channel has an injury guy. And so one of the things that I appreciate you saying that, because one of the things that when I started, I wanted to do was where can I benefit fantasy players, but also just the profession of analyzing injuries as a whole. Where can I, come in and what's something that nobody else is really doing, and how can I become, kind of the specialist at that thing? I certainly am never going to be as good at looking at a video and telling you what has probably happened right there as you are. And to me, it's redundant for me to go do that when I can just say, hey, look, this guy is, Dr. Chow is the expert at this. He's right way more often than anybody else at that. Go see what he says about that. I'm more focused on after we get the diagnosis, what does that mean for fantasy football? And so, the injury stuff, I'm hoping with this guide that, 10 years from now, we can use this data that I've collected as a way to further this concept of being able to, I don't say I ever predict injuries, but I do try to predict which players are riskier. We know that previous injury is our best predictor of future injury, even though it's not, perfect science by any stretch. I hope that this data is useful to, what you do, but also what other people that are trying to get this injury thing figured out. I really hope that we can do that, over time. And part of it is just you have to have the data to do that. You can't just wake up and say, I'm going to prevent this guy from getting hurt. Like, you have to have some research that shows, what's the most likely thing that's going to happen to him. I appreciate you saying that. I do try to do my own thing. I don't want to copy anybody, and
Oh, no,
I
you're
have
what
seen
you
a
do,
few
great.
people.
Yeah,
Yeah, I have
what you do
seen a few
great.
people trying to do injury history related stuff now, which is cool. I've done it for 5 years, and it's. I knew at some point somebody else was going to want to come in and try to do a similar thing, but I'm
Ethan,
okay
what
with
I
that.
always say, Ethan, what I always say is, if Tesla were the only electric vehicle on the marketplace, that means electric vehicles as a concept don't work. You just have
Yeah,
to, Tesla just has to concentrate on being the best electric vehicle
yeah,
out there. And look, if you're the only guy doing a injury history in college, it means nobody cares. The concept doesn't work
yeah,
if you were the only guy. So that's the way I look at it with injuries. If I were the only injury guy, that means people don't care about injuries. So the fact that they
yeah,
care and there's more, it's fine. So you touched on 2 points that I have to I'll share here. One is I don't know how I got to be the old guy in the room, but when I randomly started doing this, and Ethan, I don't know if you know how I randomly started doing this. I mean, I got married late in life, had boy girl twins during the season, and I thought I could continue, but then figured out that I couldn't. So I'm sitting on my couch for the first time watching, and a guy goes down, and they say, "Hey, oh, looks like he's going to be okay. He's walking off." And I'm like, "No, his season's over. He tore his ACL." And my wife says to me kindly, "Tell it to someone who cares and sign me up for Twitter." I had no idea what Twitter is. So when I started doing it, and this is kind of what you're saying. I mean, when I started doing it, no one had done it. And I can't tell you the number of times in the first few years that I got fans mad at me. And that's actually
yeah,
why I say by video appears to, because I say he tore his ACL, people go crazy. Like, how do you
yeah,
know you're on your couch? And I've never hidden the fact. Initially, I was on my couch. Now we're more in the command center, but whatever. We're not there. We're not examining a player. And I try and make that very clear. And then all the people who shout about what I do is unethical. How's that ethical that you do this? You're a doctor.
yeah,
And the good news is, first of all, I vetted it with ethicists and whatever. And now when there's a new person that says that, I don't have to say anything. The followers say, no, this is kind of what it is. And look, you're entitled to your opinion. And I'm not saying, I try never to give the impression that I know for sure. I deal in insider knowledge, not insider information, right? Big
yeah,
difference in the two. So that's one thing that comes to mind. So yeah, I think hopefully those battles are solved and everything can move forward. The other thing is when when I hear and see what you do, I have recurring nightmares about because believe it or not, Ethan, I did that. I did that for 17 years. Well, I've been to 20 plus combines. And besides it being Groundhog Day, I did what you did, except
yeah,
differently, right? I actually got the exam part, right? Which you can't
yeah.
get.
It must be.
And,
It would be
and,
nice to have that.
and I got the MRI part, so
Yeah,
literally we, see the player and get to examine him. And then the bane of my existence was then going over the MRIs and correlating what part of the MRI was accurate and giving all the grades and so forth. And really going through all 330 combine draft eligible players and grading them. And then, there are times that they would definitely listen in the draft room, and you'd have draft meetings. And I've always told the story that on draft day there are only a few people in the room. There are only about 8 to 10 people at the what I call the parents table. The head athletic trainer and I were at what I called the kids table at Thanksgiving in the corner.
mm,
But the coordinators weren't in the room, just the head coach. Most scouts were not in the room. I mean, it was and we'd sat at the kids table, and most years it'd be very quiet. Every now and again it'd be interesting, and there were a lot of times you spent a lot of time grading someone out to the minutia, and they draft who they want to draft. And I always looked at it
yeah,
this way. Our medical grade was like a 40 time. If you say this kid has game speed and you're not worried about his 40 time, that's why you pay the big bucks as the GM.
yeah,
Same with injury history. I mean, it's a data point. And if you have two players the same and one has injury history, maybe you go here. But if two players
Yeah.
aren't the same, you might take that. And so that's kind of I appreciate what you do, and I know how much work it is because I've done it in a different way before. And believe me, I don't want to do it again. So kudos there. So to that end, give us a couple of your biggest surprises or takeaways? Like, is someone going to get drafted higher or lower? Is your surprises from your analysis this year?
Yeah. So this year, probably the biggest surprise for me. Now, this is the fifth year that I've done it, so I primarily compare it to the other 4 years that I've done it. I don't have the years and years of data that NFL teams do, but ACL tears in wide receivers this year, the history is staggering. Right now, I've got five different wide receivers from this year's class that have torn an ACL. In the 4 years prior to this, I only had six. So we're almost doubling the data set that I have in terms of players coming into the NFL at the wide receiver position with an ACL tear. The biggest difference also with this year is that those wide receivers are first round level talents. We rarely see that, especially with guys that, are potentially like top two or three at their position group. So, the five guys from this year, Jamison Williams, John Mechie, those two tore their ACLs in basically back-to-back games against Georgia at the end of the season. We've got Traylon Burks, who tore his ACL in high school. A lot of people don't know that because it happened in high school. Same thing with Justin Ross. He actually tore his ACL in high school. And then George Pickens, who tore his ACL and then actually managed to come back this year. He tore it in the spring last year. So these are not no-name guys, at least from a fantasy perspective. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the NFL approaches that specific injury and, where these guys go. I do think that talent is going to overrule, risk with a few of those guys. Jamison Williams doesn't really have any other injury history of note, but a guy like Traylon Burks does. And so, and Justin Ross obviously has quite a few things going on besides that. So we're going to see what the NFL thinks about this.
Well, and here's the thing: like we didn't even talk about Drake London, who's coming off an injury, who probably
Yeah.
will be first wide receiver. And
Yes.
we talked about it. I think Drake London's going to be fine, no issues. I get pretty
Yeah.
confident on Drake London. But each team will have its own impression, and the way that the teams decide, and this is sort of what I try and share. It's not just this video carny trick, but all decisions are not simple and multifactorial. And it's not like Jameson Williams, yes, no, right? It's
Yeah.
depends on what you are. The best example I'll give you is that people thought I was panning the Tennessee Titans when they selected Jeffrey Simmons
Hmm.
coming off his spring ACL tear. I was not panning them at all. I have a lot of respect for Mike Vrabel. I like him a lot.
Yeah.
Got to know him a little bit personally. And what that told me is the Titans, okay, if you're a team that says, I need this one player to win this year and my window's closing, you cannot take Jeffrey Simmons. You cannot take Jameson Williams. You cannot take John Mechie. But if you're a team that's building for the future or thinking that you can get over the top with this
Yeah.
player down the road, I pan Jeffrey Simmons' pick as not ready to play his rookie season. But of
Hmm.
course, you draft a guy more than your rookie season. So, for example, for fantasy drafts this year, I don't think you can touch or way down the list Mechie and Jameson Williams and whatever. But for keeper leagues and dynasty leagues, it's a different story. Depends on what you're
Yeah.
trying to do. And same for teams, right? And they're not going to be. I mean, we've seen the videos of Jameson Williams jogging in place and doing. I
Yeah.
mean, NFL is a lot harder than that. I mean, I can't
Yeah.
tell you the number of times that like okay, not banging on the Tennessee Titans, but I remember this offseason. um, they they surprised me. They signed your Steeler guy, Bud Dupree, to a big
Yeah.
contract coming off an ACL.
Big
And I was like,
contract.
I'm surprised he got that big contract. And then, of course, all the video popped up, and look at how great he's doing. But like,
Yeah.
and you see it probably too, the fine movements
Yeah.
aren't there. And I was like, no, he's
Yeah.
favoring his knee. There's no way he's ready. And he didn't look very good at all for the first 3 quarters of the season. And then late season, he looked pretty good. And that's the natural history. So I think judging, I always tell people judging their injury history, it's important, but it's one data point in the whole
Yes.
picture, in terms
Yeah.
of
And
what it is. It's an important data point, and it's one that we should
yes.
get. And it's certain what you're doing, the NFL teams do thoroughly and regularly because it's
Yes.
important. And I will say this, that how the league has changed is in the past, GMs would tell me, and this shows my age again, can this guy be our left tackle for the next 10, 15 years? Okay. But by the end of my career, the question from the GM is he going to make it 5? Okay, he's got an injury history. Is he going to make it 4 or 5? I
Yeah.
mean, the long term view of here's my guy there forever because of free agency, the GMs
Yeah.
don't have anymore, right? And so it makes things different. What about quarterbacks? You got any thoughts on quarterbacks? I mean, with your
So
injury history, do you look at hand size?
I don't look at hand size. That's a pretty, I guess, fascinating debate on Kenny Pickett, a Pittsburgh guy. So, I don't know. You'd probably tell me. You could tell me more about that. You've been in the rooms at least. As far as, do the NFL teams really make that a huge deal, or is that something that we all freak out about
Well,
in the off season? And
Well, first of all, a lot of misinformation. We've done some videos, but you measure hand size by opening up, right? And you measure
yeah,
from here to here. Well, he does have a
yeah,
thumb that doesn't open up, so he's going to
yeah,
measure smaller, right? So
yes,
he measures smaller because he can't do that. So he measures
yeah,
smaller, but when you grip a football, you don't ever open hand a football.
yeah.
So
No, there's
it's
no
just
like,
there's a little bit of difference there. So I don't think his hand is as small. But then, of course, we look at data that he's fumbled and they get worried. And as you know, the NFL ball's a little bit bigger. I think the one key that teams wanted to do for sure is, at least in his pro day, can he spin it? I mean, is
yeah,
that like slight difference in the ball, the NFL ball being bigger? Can he spin it? And if he can spin it, I don't think that his hand size is as huge a deal as people are making it out to be. I'll bet his effective hand size is bigger than his measured hand size because
yeah,
of that thumb issue. And as long as they see that he can spin an NFL ball, look, you got to understand, there's only 7 draft picks, okay? And
yeah,
most teams only 1 first rounder. You have a team of 30, 40 people analyzing them. You got to have something
yeah,
to do, right? I mean,
yeah. Oh, well, yeah, that's
everyone has
true.
their role, and it's going to, so there is some over analysis there and so forth. So, do you get into any of the prop bets on who's going where and how high?
I try not to. I would say that Vegas is way smarter than I am. There's definitely times when, last year I made some prop bets on guys that, I just thought their injury history was just definitely going to shy teams away, and then they still got taken really high, and then they were hurt all year. And so I do think that sometimes teams get locked in, and they want this one guy, and they're willing to take the risk more than I would be willing to place money on it. So I don't get into that too much. I do try to, I have friends that do a lot of betting, and they will reach out to me again for that data point. When they're making bets, hey, what's this guy's injury history look like? Is it something that teams are going to shy away from him or even consider shying away from him? Is this going to affect his draft stock at all? The biggest one I've gotten this year is David Ajabo, I think is how you say his name. He tore his Achilles during his pro day. And so I'm telling them that based on what I've seen, and maybe you can touch on this a little bit more from the NFL team's perspective, I feel like an Achilles injury, a month and a half before the NFL draft is not great, but we're going to see how the NFL values that injury and what it says about where the NFL thinks they are in terms of rehabbing Achilles tears, and getting players back to their prior level of production, coming off of that injury. Because there's actually two in this draft class now. Master Teague tore his Achilles in college too, but it's not something you see with college kids a lot. And so I'm curious to see. Master Teague is not at the level, sadly, sorry if anybody loves Master Teague, but he's not at the level that David Ajobo is, or Jabo. I'm trying to say his name right, but hopefully he won't come
We'll give
after
it
me
two
about this.
two data points here, Ethan. Two data points. I don't remember how many years ago, handful. Sidney Rice, I think his name was, a corner from University of Washington,
Mm-hmm.
tore his Achilles at his pro day. And the Eagles drafted him, and there was a lot of chatter. He'll be full go by the start of a thing. His surgeon even came out and said he'll be running in full go by the start. But that's his surgeon, right? He can only put
Yeah,
out positive news. We never looked at any of that. And I said it's not a bad draft pick for the Eagles, but he's not playing as a rookie
yeah,
essentially. And I don't think he played at all as a rookie. Maybe the last game or a little, but that doesn't mean he's a bad draft pick. If the Eagles thought at that level, to get basically you're trading this year's second round for next year's first round if you think that much of the guy, right? And
yeah,
that's not necessarily bad. Ajabo, I think it will be fine, but not this season, right? I mean, you
yeah,
can't count on much for him this season. So that factors into how you draft and what we discussed before. And the other example everyone talks about with Achilles now is, Cam Akers. Oh my gosh, he did great. He did great. He defied odds by coming back. But if you look at his six scores that we talked about all season, and now he's come out and admitted and said his games weren't up to what his potential is. He averaged 2.3 yards a carry. He was not
yep,
explosive. And I think part of where he got playing time is Daryl Henderson got injured late in the season, and Sony Michel with
yep,
his knee injury was breaking down. So he was best available, et cetera. And, kudos for his great recovery. But 2.3 yards and you didn't really pass the eyeball test in terms of being explosive. So, I mean, and that's the final thing is injury recovery is not a light switch. It's not like six
yeah,
months you're 100%. 5 months and 29 days you can't do anything. No, it's a slow sunrise, and that was
yeah.
Akers. It was still dawn when he was playing. It wasn't high noon when he was playing. But this season, I think he'll be fine. Anyways, thrilled to have you on, Ethan. We went longer than I thought. The kids and the wife are clamoring, but I think it was worth the time. It was fun chatting with you, and appreciate you and your work. Anything final that you want to say?
Yeah, just if anybody's looking for the rookie injury guide, you can find it at thefantasyheadliners.com. It's the first thing you see. You can follow me on Twitter, at eTurnerFF. And I think that's pretty much it. Fantasy Headliners is on YouTube, so all of my in-season content is on YouTube. And that's pretty much the only thing I've got to plug here. Go buy the guide if you want to, get to know more information. I mean, Dr. Chow just said the NFL teams do this, so if you play fantasy football, I think you should do it too.
Yeah, and if you notice that our Sports Injury Central articles, when we cover a college player and when we've used your stuff, the guys are pretty good about saying we use the injury history from that.
Yes.
And look, and credit where credit is due, and they're believe me, they're writing that one sentence. Takes them a lot less time than actually doing the work to do what you did. So I
Yeah,
think they're happy to write that sentence, and
I think
we
so.
want to do that too. All right, Ethan, thank you very much. Thanks for watching on the special draft edition of the Pro Football Doc podcast with our special guest here. And happy draft week to everyone.